This mysterious book unveils a startling truth about the afterlife. Known as the Tibetan Book of the Dead, it reveals a cosmic journey that begins at death's threshold. Souls navigate the bardos, enigmatic realms shaped by their deepest fears and desires. Hidden for centuries, its secrets offer a profound perspective on life, death, and beyond. Tune in as we uncover secrets that may change everything you thought you knew about the afterlife and leave you questioning what comes next. Final tests of the luminous mind. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, it's not your usual bedtime read. It's a guide, yes, a guide for what comes next. According to it, death isn't just the end of the road. It's more like a pit stop in a cosmic journey that's way more complex than you might think. This text lays out a trip through a place they call the bardos, which are kind of like waiting rooms for the soul. Here, you're supposed to figure out some pretty deep stuff about your mind. They say the key to escaping the whole birth, death, rebirth cycle, a little thing called samsara, is recognizing this glowing, pure part of your mind. Do that, and boom, you're free. No more spinning on the reincarnation wheel. Miss it? Well, you're back for another round of life's ups and downs. And yet, within these otherworldly corridors lies a truth so profound, it might just shatter everything you think you know about existence. The bardos, according to this ancient text, are not just random stops along the way. They're designed to test your awareness and understanding of the true nature of reality. It's like a cosmic exam where the stakes are incredibly high. Each stage presents you with opportunities to either wake up to your luminous mind or get lost in illusions. The tricky part? These illusions often reflect your fears, attachments, and desires, the very things that keep you tethered to the cycle of rebirth. Now, let's fast forward a few centuries. Some modern thinkers are looking at death and the afterlife through the lens of science, specifically quantum physics. Sounds fancy, right? But the gist is simple. Some experts think consciousness isn't just tied to your brain. Instead, it might be a universal thing. A bit of cosmic data hanging around even after your body calls it quits. This idea sort of vibes with the ancient texts' take on a never-ending mind. It's like science trying to catch up with spirituality. Quantum physics has its own mind-blowing theories about reality and consciousness. There's a hypothesis that consciousness could exist outside of the brain as a fundamental property of the universe. Imagine your mind as a radio receiver picking up signals from some universal broadcast. When the receiver breaks, the broadcast doesn't stop. This perspective aligns eerily well with the Tibetan Book of the Dead's teachings, where the mind continues its journey beyond physical death. And there's more. Ever heard of the electromagnetic soul? It's this concept that says you're basically made of energy. Science backs this up with a basic rule. Energy doesn't just disappear. When you die, your energy shifts into something else. What that something else looks like depends on your frequency, not the radio kind, but your spiritual energy. This idea blends physics with the afterlife in a way that makes you think twice about what's really going on. Energy and frequency are concepts that have intrigued both scientists and spiritual seekers for centuries. The idea is that your state of mind, emotions, and actions during life influence your energetic frequency. When you pass on, this frequency determines the nature of your next experience. High frequencies, think love, compassion, and enlightenment, might propel you to higher realms or even liberation. Lower frequencies, tied to fear or greed, could pull you back into cycles of struggle. It's like tuning into a channel that matches your vibe, for better or worse. Why does any of this matter? Well, thinking about death this way can actually change how you live. If you see it as a transition instead of a dead end, the fear of it starts to fade. You might even start living with a little more purpose, kindness, and appreciation for the here and now. These teachings push you to cherish every moment, knowing it's all connected to something bigger than yourself. Living with this perspective means embracing the present and letting go of unnecessary worries. Imagine viewing each day as part of a larger cosmic journey where every choice matters. It encourages you to cultivate qualities like kindness and mindfulness, not just for the sake of a better afterlife, but to enrich the here and now. This approach can transform mundane routines into opportunities for growth and connection. And let's not forget the ripple effect. By living with more awareness and compassion, you're contributing to a collective energy that influences the world around you. Think of it as adding your unique frequency to a universal symphony. This interconnectedness is a recurring theme in both ancient teachings and modern science, reminding us that individual actions have far-reaching impacts. Embracing these perspectives doesn't mean ignoring the challenges of life. On the contrary, it's about facing them with a sense of purpose and curiosity. Each difficulty becomes an opportunity to learn and grow, contributing to your overall energy and consciousness. This mindset fosters resilience, helping you navigate life's ups and downs with grace. One journey ends and another begins, revealing more about the unseen ties of existence. Then, the mandala of peaceful deities guides the spirit to unity with this cosmic display. But there's a subtle trap. The dull path of healing always looms nearby. The text encourages the spirit to resist that pull, saying, "At this moment, let your compassion flow. Draw back from the path that leads to delusion and the lower animal realms." But what happens if the bardo being can't align with the peaceful deities? That's when the wrathful ones make their entrance. And these beings don't hold back. Imagine sharp fangs, multiple heads, weapons in hand, surrounded by flames and laughing ominously. Sounds terrifying? Well, that's the point. These blood-drinking deities embody raw energy, and their presence can feel like a nightmare come to life. Here's the twist, though. Even these fearsome beings are not to be feared. The text reveals that they too are pure manifestations of the mind. Their wrathful forms are just another reflection of the bardo being's own nature. It's a test, a challenge to see through the terror and recognize that all of this is coming from within. If the bardo being recognizes that the peaceful or wrathful deities are simply reflections of their own mind, they achieve something extraordinary, merging inseparably with the lights and forms of the deities, attaining Buddhahood. This is their second chance to break free from samsara, the constant loop of dying and starting over. But let's be real, it's no easy task. Fear, confusion, and doubt are often too overwhelming. And what happens if fear takes over? Liberation slips through their grasp. The peaceful deities transform into Mahakala, the protector of Dharma, and the wrathful deities morph into Yama Dharmaraja, the lord of Buddhist hells. Yama's presence is as vast as the sky, and he doesn't come quietly. Picture him holding a slate listing all past actions, giving commands of strike and kill, while performing gruesome acts like severing heads and ripping out organs. It's enough to make the bardo being faint in terror, and when they awaken, the opportunity for liberation is gone. From here, the bardo being enters the third stage, the bardo of rebirth. This stage is where karma steps in to decide their next destination. The possibilities? They could be reborn into the realm of gods, jealous gods, humans, animals, hungry ghosts, or even hell. And the process of transformation begins with the appearance of womb entrances. The bardo being feels a pull toward one, and upon entering, conception occurs. Just like that, the pattern continues, and they're reborn into a new life. But as this phase of rebirth unfolds in the East, the West took these profound teachings and reshaped them into something entirely its own. The concept of bardo, with its vivid imagery and spiritual depth, found new life in Western interpretations and cultural reinventions. How the West reimagined bardo. Let's take a step back and remember something important. The Tibetan Book of the Dead isn't just a philosophical text. It's a ritual guide meant to be read aloud to the dead. Its oral nature is key. Much of the text directly addresses the deceased with lines like, "O child of Buddha nature," offering encouragement and instructions for navigating the wild and often terrifying visions of the bardo states. When you read this text with its oral purpose in mind, even the more horrifying parts, like Yama drinking brains, start to make sense. They're not meant to shock for the sake of shock. Instead, they serve to guide and prepare the spirit for the challenges of the bardo. And about the name, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, It's a little misleading. It's not actually a standalone book, but a small section of a much larger text called Peaceful and Wrathful Deities, a natural liberation through recognition of enlightened intention. This context adds even more depth to a text already filled with wisdom, ritual, and cosmic imagery. The origins of the Tibetan Book of the Dead are steeped in legend and tradition, tracing back to the 8th century tantric master Padmasambhava, an important figure in Tibetan Buddhism. According to tradition, Padmasambhava foresaw that his teachings might one day be distorted or lost. To safeguard them, he devised a unique solution. He hid his teachings across the Tibetan landscape. These hidden treasures, called therma, meaning treasure, were concealed in caves, lakes, mountaintops, or even within the minds and hearts of future disciples, waiting to be discovered when the time was right. The people chosen to uncover these treasures are known as Tertons, treasure discoverers. It's believed that Tertons are reincarnations of Padmasambhava's closest disciples, handpicked by the master himself to rediscover and revive his teachings in later lifetimes. This tradition credits the Tibetan Book of the Dead as part of one such treasure. The story of its discovery is just as fascinating. In the 14th century, a 15-year-old boy named Karmalingpa, the son of a tantric master, is said to have found a collection of texts buried in a cave. Among them was the complete Peaceful and Wrathful Deities text, which includes the section we now call the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It's a striking narrative, filled with mysticism and spiritual destiny. While this is the traditional story, many scholars approach it with skepticism. From their perspective, the Therma texts are more likely the work of the Tertons themselves, with the attribution to Padmasambhava serving as a symbolic nod to his authority and influence, rather than literal authorship. Interestingly, while the Tibetan Book of the Dead is widely recognized and celebrated in the West, its prominence within Tibetan Buddhist practice isn't quite as grand. Tibetan Buddhists are often surprised by how much attention this single text, a small part of one of their many funerary traditions, has received abroad. It's a reminder that sometimes the spiritual spotlight shines in unexpected places. Some scholars argue that the Tibetan Book of the Dead has become more of an American spiritual classic than a Tibetan one. Why? It all starts with a guy named Walter Evans Wentz, the American who introduced the text to the Western world. Let's break it down. Evans Wentz wasn't your average academic. He was a theosophist, part of a late 19th century spiritual movement that blended Hinduism, Buddhism, and various esoteric traditions. In 1919, during a spiritual journey through India, Evans Wentz came across some Tibetan funerary texts. He didn't get them directly from Tibetan monks or scholars, though. He bought them from a British officer fresh from Tibet, which, at the time, was under British invasion. Problem? Evans Wentz couldn't actually read the texts. To figure out what they said, he traveled to Northeast India and sought out Kazadawa Samdup, an English-language teacher known for helping Westerners translate religious texts. Samdup translated the funerary texts, and Evans Wentz published them in 1927 as the Tibetan Book of the Dead. He chose the title because he thought it resembled the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and believed both texts drew from some ancient universal wisdom. Evans Wentz even framed his relationship with Samdup as a spiritual one, describing himself as Samdup's disciple. In the preface of the first edition, he wrote, "I am seeking so far as possible to suppress my own views and act simply as the mouthpiece of a Tibetan sage of whom I was a recognized disciple." This may sound dramatic at first, but scholar Don Lopez has pointed out that this so-called guru-disciple bond is questionable. According to their surviving letters, the two had a brief professional relationship lasting only a couple of months, hardly the spiritual mentorship Evans Wentz made it out to be. Despite this, Evans Wentz's work propelled the Tibetan Book of the Dead into Western consciousness. Its appeal was fueled by two main factors: a romanticized view of Tibet as a mystical, otherworldly place, and a universal human fascination with death. The desire to understand what happens after we die, paired with a dose of Orientalist fascination, helped turn this text into a cornerstone of Western spirituality, even if its prominence in actual Tibetan Buddhist practice is relatively minor. The Tibetan Book of the Dead found massive popularity in the West, particularly in the United States. among people drawn to spiritualism, esotericism, and altered states of consciousness. Its appeal spanned decades, from the 1930s and 1940s right through the counterculture movements of the 1960s. Carl Jung, as we mentioned earlier, lent credibility by writing introductions for several editions. And in 1964, Timothy Leary, the infamous psychedelic researcher, took things further. Along with a few collaborators, he published The Psychedelic Experience, a guide to navigating trips on illicit substances, explicitly inspired by the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Beyond its influence on spirituality and psychedelics, the text left its mark on Western culture at large. Films like Jacob's Ladder and Enter the Void borrow heavily from its ideas and imagery, weaving its themes into storytelling that resonates with modern audiences. But claiming that the Tibetan Book of the Dead is more American than Tibetan can feel offensive when you consider its origins. After all, it's written in the Tibetan language, performed by Tibetan Buddhist lamas, and deeply rooted in Tibetan traditions. Yet, through figures like Walter Evans Wentz and his successors, the text was reshaped and rebranded for an American audience, transforming its cultural significance along the way. This is a classic example of religious globalization. Sacred ideas from one culture often take on a new life when they interact with another. As scholar Don Lopez aptly points out, there's an irony in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It's not really a book, nor is it strictly about death. It's fundamentally about healing, whether that's the awakening of souls or the rediscovery of thermatexts. Evans Wentz's version isn't so much a direct transmission of Tibetan Buddhist practice as it is an American reimagining. By isolating a few chapters from a larger pattern of texts, giving them an evocative new title, and layering on his own interpretations, he created something that resonated powerfully with Western audiences. The result? A text that continues to bridge and blur the lines between two very different worlds. As Don Lopez points out, the text is fundamentally about Buddhist rebirth. Yet, for American audiences, it's often read as a psychological or even psychedelic guide. This transformation highlights more than just cultural reinterpretation. It's a lesson in how religious authority and sacred texts evolve as they move between contexts. Think about it. Many religious traditions establish authority by connecting their text to prominent figures. Christians link books like the Gospel of John to apostles of Jesus, and Sikhs regard the Guru Granth Sahib as their eternal guru, maintaining continuity with the lineage of their 10 human gurus. Tibetan Buddhism follows a similar pattern, rooting the legitimacy of Therma texts in Padmasambhava's disciples, believed to reincarnate across generations to rediscover and reintroduce these teachings. Theosophists like Evans Wentz weren't exempt from this need for authority. By claiming to be a disciple of a lama, he aligned himself with the lineage of Karma Lingpa, the original revealer of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and, by extension, tied himself to Padmasambhava's ancient chain of authority. It's fascinating how this interplay of tradition, reinterpretation, and personal claims shaped the text's legacy in the West. This blending of ancient wisdom with modern reinterpretation didn't stop with scholars. It found its way into unexpected corners of culture. Like even the music scene was echoing the transformative ideas of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Music meets Tibetan wisdom. The 1960s were more than just about music. They were about exploring deeper meanings and pushing boundaries. Rock musicians of the era weren't satisfied with just making hits. They wanted to tap into something spiritual and transformative. Many of them looked to the ancient wisdom of the East, and the Tibetan Book of the Dead became a massive influence. One artist who took its ideas and ran with them was none other than John Lennon. Paul McCartney once shared that the final track on Revolver, Tomorrow Never Knows, was entirely Lennon's vision. During this period, some illicit substances were making waves, and Lennon had gotten his hands on Timothy Leary's version of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. The ideas in the book fascinated him. Unlike the traditional British view of death as something dull and final, the text described death as a transformative journey. It compared dying to an epic voyage, similar to how the ancient Egyptians prepared their dead for the afterlife. For Lennon, this idea was electrifying. With those illicit substances opening his mind to new perspectives, the themes of the book resonated even more. It inspired him to create a song that captured the essence of these ideas. Tomorrow Never Knows became a bold and trippy exploration of life, death, and the unknown. It was Lennon channeling the wisdom of an ancient text into something revolutionary. The book itself contains one of its most famous lines: "Whenever in doubt, turn off your mind, relax, float downstream." Sound familiar? That's because John Lennon borrowed it and transformed it into the lyrics of his first psychedelic anthem, Tomorrow Never Knows. But Lennon didn't want to go full philosopher without a little twist. He knew the best way to weave spirituality into music was to add a touch of playfulness. As he explained, "That's me in my Tibetan Book of the Dead period. I took one of Ringo's malapropisms as the title to sort of take the edge off the heavy philosophical lyrics." And just like that, a deep spiritual concept became part of a song that was as trippy as it was relatable. Now, let's talk about Leonard Cohen. For some reason, the idea of him playing tennis is oddly funny, but that's exactly what the monks at a Buddhist monastery had him doing. When Cohen retreated to the monastery, the monks noticed something right away. He was too serious. Their advice? Loosen up. They sent him to the tennis courts, insisting he needed to learn how to play, not just work. This experience left a lasting impression on Cohen, who embraced the lesson wholeheartedly. Long after he hung up his racket, he shared the mantra that stuck with him: lighten up. That's what enlightenment means, to lighten up. Leave it to Cohen to turn a bit of Buddhist wisdom into something profound, yet effortlessly cool. For Leonard Cohen, the idea of separating yourself from the grind was transformative. It became the foundation of much of his later work, which radiated the sense of peace he discovered through this liberated mindset. Feeling deeply grateful for the inspiration, Cohen decided to give back in a way that felt meaningful. He lent his iconic voice to narrate a 2-part documentary series on the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It was his way of honoring the lessons and the calm it had brought into his life. Moving on to Laurie Anderson, when she and her husband, Lou Reed, connected. They were both at a turning point, reevaluating their artistic journeys and how spiritualism fit into their lives. Their relationship wasn't just about art. It was built on shared values and a deeper understanding of life. Together, they came up with 3 simple rules to live by, something Anderson says became their guideposts. "I'm just going to tell you what they are because they come in really handy," Anderson once shared. "Because things happen so fast, it's always good to have a few, watchwords to fall back on. Practical, thoughtful, and profoundly grounded, just like their approach to life and art." Laurie Anderson and Lou Reed's 3 life rules are the kind of wisdom you want to scribble down and keep forever. They went like this. 1. Don't be afraid of anyone. Now, can you imagine living your life afraid of no one? 2. Get a really good bullshit detector. And 3. Be really, really tender. With those 3 things, you don't need anything else. Simple, powerful, and timeless. Anderson added her own perspective to this philosophy by absorbing the wisdom around her and creating her own rules. For her, part of that process was diving into the Tibetan Book of the Dead. The book left such an impression that she created an album inspired by its teachings, turning ancient ideas into a modern artistic expression. It's the perfect example of blending the spiritual with the creative. Now, let's fast forward to the 1990s. Spiritualism might have been overshadowed by the rise of beer-soaked grunge, but Radiohead kept the old-school artistic spirit alive. Thom Yorke was on a mission to explore transcendence through his music, and one of his standout tracks, I Might Be Wrong, tackled the idea of moving beyond the physical world. Yorke described the track as a snapshot of a crisis moment in his life. He shared, "I used to think there was nothing left at all." He recalled a surreal experience one night while living near a beach. As he stood outside and looked back at his empty house, he saw a figure walking around inside, even though he knew no one was there. That strange presence stuck with him, and he channeled it into the song. The result is a haunting yet deeply reflective piece that captures the search for meaning in the unknown. During a chaotic chapter in his life, Thom Yorke found solace by pulling away from the noise and seeking peace in solitude. He spent his time reconnecting with nature and observing the cycle of life and death. Reflecting on this period, York shared, "I spent a lot of time watching things die, walking a lot in vast landscapes, watching the seasons change, ancient rocks, rotting carcasses, flowers blossoming, rivers gurgling." Alongside these meditative moments, he turned to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, letting its teachings guide his introspection and influence his music. Then there's Patty Waters, a name that may not ring as many bells, but played a pivotal role in shaping cultural history. Sometimes it's not the most famous figures who spark a movement. It's those with fresh ideas at just the right time, inspiring others to take those ideas and run with them. Patty Waters, a jazz singer with an unparalleled gift for raw emotion, was one of those people. Drawing inspiration from the Tibetan Book of the Dead, Waters embraced the concept of letting things flow naturally. She translated this idea into her music by creating an open, swirling sound filled with raw, wandering emotions. Her work was an experience, a maelstrom of feelings that left an indelible mark on the artists and movements that followed. Patty Waters' unbound, free-flowing style didn't just stay in her corner of jazz. It set off a chain reaction that directly influenced trailblazers like Yoko Ono and Diamanda Galás. These artists, in turn, left their own marks, inspiring the Beatles, George Harrison's solo work, and beyond. In a way, this domino effect mirrors the central message of the Tibetan Book of the Dead itself. The text emphasizes the power of thought and its lasting impact, famously stating, "Our past thinking has determined our present status, and our present thinking will determine our future status. For man is what man thinks." It's a cycle that flows through art, life, and spiritual understanding. Profound, continuous, and endlessly interconnected. This idea of interconnected cycles naturally leads us to one of life's biggest mysteries, the question that has haunted and fascinated humans for centuries. What happens when we die? What happens to us when we die? It's the ultimate question, the kind that's kept humanity up at night since we first stopped dragging our knuckles through the muck and started pondering the big stuff. Do we simply vanish into the void, ceasing to exist? Are we thrown back into the mix as fresh-faced babies, or maybe even animals, on some endless karmic loop of reincarnation? Or is there a white light waiting for us, the one we've heard about in near-death experiences on shows like Oprah or Larry King Live? The warm glow, the smiling faces of loved ones long gone. It's comforting, right? Then there's the classic Christian image. St. Peter standing at the pearly gates, clipboard in hand, checking if your reservation for eternity in the kingdom of heaven is confirmed. Why does the question of what happens when we die cling to us so tightly? In his book, How Plato and Pythagoras Can Save Your Life, Nicholas Kardaras explores the idea that humans are unique in their ability to ponder this, because we're the only species capable of mentally traveling through time. We can project ourselves into the future, and what do we inevitably find? Death. And that realization? It shakes us to the core. Some might say it scares the hell out of us, or maybe even scares the heaven and hell into us. Pulitzer Prize-winning author Ernest Becker tackled this existential terror in his groundbreaking work, The Denial of Death. Becker argued that everything we create, our art, our towering buildings, our religions, and even our drive to have children, is rooted in one primal urge: to deny our mortality. It's all a way to soothe the deep-seated anxiety, what psychologists call thanatos anxiety, that there might be nothing beyond this physical existence. The common wisdom says we'll never really know what happens after we die, because no one has ever come back to tell us. But that might not be entirely true. Beyond the near-death experiences, or NDEs we've heard about, documented by psychologists like Dr. Raymond Moody in Life After Life and Dr. Kenneth Ring in Mindsight, there's another phenomenon that challenges our assumptions. It involves children who, without the drama of an NDE or the influence of hypnotic regression, spontaneously recall vivid details of past lives. These cases are rigorously studied, well-documented, and leave us wondering, could these glimpses into past lives hold the answers we're searching for? When it comes to children recalling past lives, these stories aren't about extravagant claims of being Cleopatra or Napoleon. Instead, they're far more grounded, and, in many cases, eerily specific. These kids often recount memories of ordinary people who passed away relatively recently, sometimes just months or a few years before their birth. What's truly fascinating is the level of detail. They'll name parents, siblings, and other relatives. They'll describe their previous villages, homes, or districts. They'll even recall what they did for a living, and most strikingly, provide vivid, accurate descriptions of how they died. Here's where it gets even more unsettling. Some of these children bear physical signs, birthmarks or congenital defects that match the cause of death they claim to have experienced in a past life. Often, these injuries were traumatic in nature, like scars from fatal wounds or marks where the body might have been pierced. The correlations are startling and difficult to dismiss as mere coincidence. And if you're thinking these accounts sound too wild to be true, consider this. Over 3,000 of these cases have been rigorously documented. What's even more surprising is that this research, far from being some fringe endeavor, has been conducted at a major U.S. university for more than 40 years. It's a reminder that the question of life after death may not be as unanswerable as we once thought. At the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia, groundbreaking research into reincarnation has been ongoing for decades. Dr. Jim B. Tucker continues the work of his predecessor, Dr. Ian Stevenson, who began this research in 1967 and devoted nearly 40 years of his life to it. Stevenson traveled the globe with his team, methodically interviewing, photographing, and documenting these astonishing cases of children who vividly recalled past lives. Stevenson's dedication to rigor and accuracy was unparalleled. In his books, such as 20 Cases Suggestive of Reincarnation and Where Reincarnation and Biology Intersect, he outlined the methods his team used to verify the children's claims. They cross-checked details like names, places, occupations, and causes of death against official records and interviews with surviving family members of the deceased. If there was any evidence that a child might have been exposed to the details of the prior life through stories, media, or other sources, Stevenson rejected those cases as inconclusive. Only cases where no other explanation could account for the memories were accepted as being suggestive of reincarnation. This careful approach ensured that the research wasn't dismissed as speculation or wishful thinking. By setting such high standards for evidence, Stevenson and his team created a body of work that challenges conventional understanding and opens the door to fascinating possibilities about what might happen after death. Does this prove that there's life after death? That's for you to decide. What's more, there have been controlled double-blind experiments showing that intercessory prayer, praying for someone's healing from afar, can yield positive recovery outcomes. This has been observed in coronary and oncology patients, suggesting that something intangible may be at play. Then there's the fascinating work of Dr. William Tiller and his team at Stanford, who conducted repeatable experiments demonstrating that focused meditative thought could alter the properties of material objects. In one case, they showed that the pH level of water could be raised or lowered simply by concentrated intention. Skeptics might shrug and ask, so what? What does changing the pH of water have to do with life after death? It's a fair question, but here's the thing. If even a fraction of the research mentioned holds up under scrutiny, it takes a big hole in the dominant materialist paradigm, the idea that everything in the universe operates solely through physical, mechanistic processes. This worldview precludes the possibility of metaphysical phenomena, such as thoughts influencing biology or consciousness surviving after death. But if the evidence for these outlier phenomena is valid, it forces us to question the completeness of that materialist view. A solid theory should account for all the data, not just the easy-to-explain parts. If the mechanistic model can't explain these phenomena, then it's likely incomplete, or even flawed. And that opens the door to alternative perspectives that can incorporate metaphysical realities, like the ones documented in this research. Theoretical physics already offers us glimpses of such possibilities. Quantum mechanics, string theory, and holographic theories of the universe suggest a reality that's far stranger and more complex than the materialist model allows. If these alternative paradigms can explain phenomena like the influence of thought on physical matter or the persistence of consciousness beyond the body, they could radically reshape how we understand life, death, and everything in between. This leads us to the ancient Greeks, who weren't just mildly curious about death. In fact, they were obsessed with it. From harvest and fertility festivals to myths rooted in underworld lore, and even death recreating Orphic rites, they leaned all the way into the concept of mortality. But why? Why this fixation on the underworld and what lies beyond? Plato offers us a clue. He called philosophy a kind of death before dying. This wasn't about morbidity, it was about enlightenment. Plato and Pythagoras believed that by confronting the transient nature of the physical body, we could better grasp the eternal essence of the soul. To the Greeks, true understanding came from peeling back the illusion of the material world and getting a glimpse of what some might call ultimate reality. The Greeks saw it as a kind of hero's journey, a phrase later popularized by Joseph Campbell. Facing your mortality and the darker corners of your psyche, your shadow side, was an essential part of achieving personal integration and spiritual growth. Plato believed that by metaphorically dying before actual death, a person could transcend the ordinary and touch something eternal. How did they do this? Through a disciplined mind-body-soul lifestyle filled with metaphysical philosophy. This led to a ritual called incubation, where participants would lie perfectly still in a pitch-dark cave for hours, or even days. If they were adequately prepared, this process could lead to an extraordinary transformation, a feeling of shedding the physical body as a snake sheds its skin. This wasn't just spiritual fluff. The Greeks were exploring a process of personal alchemy, the kind Carl Jung later wrote about in his studies of transformation and self-actualization. They were building on insights that stretched back to the Egyptians, Babylonians, and beyond, tapping into universal truths about the interplay between life, death, and the eternal. For them, this deep dive into the shadow was more than just about understanding death. It was about discovering what it truly means to live. The real magic behind near-death experiences might lie in something profound, the dissolution of the self and a fleeting glimpse into the infinite. It's as if death acts as a release, breaking down the boundaries of our individual, ego-driven consciousness and expanding it into something much larger. When the walls of the self crumble, what's left? Is it nothingness? Or is that nothing actually everything? The boundless allness that some call ultimate reality. So, what really happens when we die? Maybe it's not an ending at all, but the start of a whole new awakening. The wild thing about Plato and Pythagoras is that they believed you didn't need to face death to experience a transformative awakening. Their teachings outlined a way of life rooted in philosophy and deep contemplation that could strip away the illusions of the material world and help you tap into something eternal. Essentially, they were handing humanity a cheat code for a life-changing, mind-blowing glimpse of the infinite no near-death experience required. It's a staggering idea, one that suggests the ultimate mystery of existence might be closer than we ever imagined. But what about people who have technically died and come back? In 2001, a 66-year-old man undergoing surgery for an abdominal aneurysm experienced cardiac arrest. After 17 minutes of CPR, defibrillation, and medication, his vital signs were gone. The medical team declared him dead. 10 minutes later, against all odds, his surgeon found a pulse. The man was alive, and the operation went on to a successful conclusion. Then there's another case from 2014 of a 78-year-old man in Mississippi. After a hospice nurse found no pulse, he was pronounced dead and sent to the morgue. The next day, the man woke up in a body bag. These unbelievable stories sound ripped straight from a horror movie, but they're part of a real-world medical phenomenon known as Lazarus syndrome. Named after Lazarus of Bethany, the biblical figure who was brought back to life by Jesus Christ after 4 days in the grave. The Lazarus phenomenon describes the delayed return of spontaneous circulation after CPR has been stopped. In layman's terms, people pronounced dead after cardiac arrest unexpectedly regain cardiac activity. While rare, Lazarus syndrome raises profound questions. Is death always final, or are there moments when the boundary between life and death becomes blurred, teasing us with the possibility that the end might not be as definite as we think? These cases might not explain the ultimate mystery, but they certainly add another fascinating angle to the age-old question of what happens after we die. But some researchers suggest that the Lazarus phenomenon might not be as mysterious as it seems. It could have a scientific explanation rooted in the resuscitation process itself. One idea points to a buildup of pressure in the chest caused by CPR. When CPR is stopped, the pressure may gradually release, allowing the heart to restart on its own. Another theory involves the delayed effects of medications like adrenaline often used during resuscitation. As several scientists explain, drugs administered through a peripheral vein might not reach the heart effectively due to impaired blood flow during CPR. Once blood flow improves after stopping CPR, the delayed delivery of these drugs could trigger a return of circulation. Besides this, there's hyperkalemia, a condition where blood potassium levels are too high, which has also been linked to delayed return of spontaneous circulation. It's one more piece of the puzzle, suggesting a range of factors might contribute to these rare and dramatic cases. Now, the challenging part is that Lazarus syndrome is incredibly rare, and the small number of documented cases makes it difficult to pinpoint the exact mechanisms behind it. That leaves us with more questions than answers. But maybe we're asking the wrong question. Instead of focusing on what might bring a patient back to life, perhaps we should consider this possibility. Were they ever truly deceased? In these extraordinary moments, the line between life and death becomes blurry, leaving us to wonder whether our understanding of death is as solid as we've always believed. Do you think the Tibetan Book of the Dead holds answers to the mysteries of life and death? Let us know in the comment. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button for more.